out to Pominals. Hope we're all doing really well. If you are new around here, please drop a like, please drop a subscribe. Really helps the channel out. We're smashing them out at the moment, so I can't thank you enough for that. You can go a step further and become a member of the channel. Please do that. We do wonderful things like sponsor Dom McCoy, things like that, do giveaways and whatnot, and you can become a part of a great community, and it really does help the channel out. The link is in the description for that. And head on over to pommysportsalmanac.com.au. That is my website. Get yourself some merch and get yourself some sick prints and stuff. Link is in the description. So Carlton coming off a real disappointing loss against Gold Coast. That bookies' favourites, and it happened again, didn't it? We lost. And I think there's a lot to digest in this game. Stay tuned for the new questions corner where you've asked some great questions. I've tried to go really in depth with some analytical and some nice pictorials, and we'll do the review now anyway. So I thought for me that there was 5 clear takeouts in this game, and I think the first one is TDK in the ruck. He was battered, and I think it was obvious he was going to be battered. For me, I can't think anyone on the planet thought he stood a cat in hell's chance, and if you did, give me one of your beers, please. What really was poignant here, though, is not so much TDK, and not to pick on him. They really did stand back in the stoppage contest, which was a reaction to Tuck Miller being so direct. And he is a real anomaly in the AFL world, is Tuck Miller, because he starts where Mr. Hewitt starts for us, just behind the contest, and he makes a beeline. And it caused chaos in the first quarter, and we got away with it a few times in the forward 50. And Carlton really started to react to that. And not many players were at the fall of the ball. They were waiting for them to get there first. And that is a huge, huge thing that we've started to see in Hawthorn's game. We saw it in elements of that when that gets taken away from Carlton, Carlton don't know what to do. And when they did have the ball, because they were so far behind the ball, there was either a load of handball chains, which just invited pressure, which then resulted into that bomb kick, which was a turnover ball. And that is something that Carlton really need to address. And they really lacked some outside run. That leads us to the second thing. If you watch GWS and Melbourne, what they did really well, particularly GWS last week, is they get the ball away from the contest. The way to beat Gold Coast is because the pressure died down, and it did in the third, and Carlton didn't make hay of it, is you've got to start getting the ball away from the contest. You've got to stop creating contests. You've got to start getting it on the outside. When Carlton did that, 2 important things happened. Curnow and Mackay dropped so far back, and they were the first kick to alleviate the entries, which meant no one was there, which meant that that bomb that goes inside 50 ended up at 70, and it started to go slow. When Carlton hit the outside, they were incredibly slow. It was almost static. There was no run and carry, and Carlton really missed this. And there was elements again of why Sard stands out. And this is a concern for me. Sard stands out because he runs and carries the bloody thing. No one else does. And that is a huge element there of what Gold Coast did. And that leads me on to my third point. When Carlton's contest is starved, if you get Carlton playing outside the wide, they don't know how to use it. And this is where that plan B comes in. Carlton's plan A at the moment is dominate around stoppages and dominate around the centre. That's a great game plan, and you'll win a lot of games like that. The problem is if you don't have an auxiliary source, like the Demons do, like top teams have done, Richmond are another example, on the other end of the scale, that they're not a contested team, but they can play it, you get found out. And what Carlton really need to start doing is using a wide kick. You find that even when they're on the wing, they can't wait to get back in the corridor. And this is a huge pull from last year. And I think that that's a tactical instruction. We were so bad about defending the corridor that logically, if you play through the corridor, you're set up there. And genuinely, that has got better, you've found. Carlton have moved up in the rankings for that defence. The problem is, though, is that because it's so contested there now, when you slow that down, particularly that's a big thing, tempo and control. Carlton have none of it at the moment. Their ability to control their tempo with their kicks and handballs is very poor. And that is a sign there for me that Vossi is aware of what we're really bad at and he's improved it. We need to start seeing layers. And I am genuinely disappointed after Hawthorn's game where there was no outside and it needed to happen. Knowing PeterV was going to be a chance to leave this week and not play, No one came up with a structure for that. And that is alarm bells, and that is personnel, which I do expect to see at least 2 changes this week, and personnel be changed to allow us to do that, because at the moment it is so one-dimensional, especially in the midfield of how these guys play, and needs to be looked at, and they need a little bit of help in that area. And I think it has to be more aggressive. I think that we have to be bold and risk taking the turnover, because if not, 2 things happen from there. Leads me on to point 4. One-dimensional ball entries. When our key forwards, it's so obvious with our leading patterns where the ball's going, and it comes unstuck when there isn't the forward pressure we saw in the first 2 rounds, and it started to die off, particularly the second half last year. And this week it's back to here to do it. David T, 2 tackles inside 50. 2 reasons why this is happening though now. 1, the entries aren't even getting inside 50 deep enough to have a tackle. It's like 65 metres out. And 2, no one's at the fall of the ball. Carlton are starting to become really reactive to that. And it's almost like they've read the press and they're starting to panic and react. And Carlton need that forward pressure. And it's amazing Durden is such a workhorse. Didn't happen. And it's not surprised that Fogg and Owens were the 2 tackles inside 50. They really missed someone doing that. And until Carlton learn to leave one of these big bastards in the goal square and not react elsewhere around the ground, again, like we talk about, react to what you can't control and control what you can. Gold Coast, on the other hand, Levi never left the goal square. Always had an outlet ball, always had someone to work off. And Carlton aren't doing that. And Carlton definitely don't bring it to ground enough inside forward 50. Harry and Charlie need to learn to rely on their smalls ASAP. And it's not happening quick enough. And that is a huge problem for me. But something that can easily be rectified with the right personnel and with the right line of movement. Whether it'll happen fast enough, I do not know, but something that needs to happen. And my final concern was the energy levels from the boys. It was interesting. Carlton, when they've kicked the first, have usually got up and about, and there's been a bit of an energy. It was really devoid, and I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but even Crippard wasn't moving his usual self, and it was interesting. A few people around the ground said that they spoke to some staff at Carlton in the 4th when Dow was removed, and they said that that was a reactionary precaution, which there was no injury though, they confirmed in that sentence. And I wonder if Cripper was carrying something going into this, because he was moved off the field very quickly, very fast, and that concerns me a little bit in that avenue. Why were Carlton so devoid of energy? They were really devoid, and you look at the numbers, they weren't running as hard, they were really not as effective. They started to kick a hell of a lot, particularly when the game got tough and the game got tired. And there was that lack of run. There was no run and bounce as we usually see, which again leads me to what was going on in the trenches prior to the game. And I want to know there, and Voss said that, I thought Voss's press conference was very good. 2 things I want to pick on that though. That one, that we aren't the finished article, which is fair enough, and I can see that he's building the building blocks. And maybe we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves. I do think this is a work in progress. I do think we will be in the 8 though, but it is a work in progress. And we'll know a lot more by the bye. I think we can make some safe assumptions then. My second one was, he picked on tackle numbers this week. And tackle numbers from Carlton were good, aside from the inside 50s. But the problem is look at how many times we tackle. And I think they're fraudulent tackles. We don't take the arms. And this is a common occurrence with Carlton. We don't take contacts and look to handball enough. When sides do, they get one out very easily because our arms, we don't take the arms. All these tackles are waist tackles. There's no arm taking. And it requires 2 people to tackle. And we've said we want to see more pad tackles in 2s. We do. The problem is they don't bring them to ground though. When they tackle in 2s, it creates one out. And there's countless. I would say that Carlton have conceded about 90 points these last 2 weeks from tackles where it's a pair tackle, the hand isn't taken, we're leaving one out for an easy handball. And you watch it, how often in the midfield them tackles are made, the handball goes from a tackle and suddenly there's players out. That is something that needs to be addressed hard out, and whether that's getting a guy who was very good at it, Diesel, coming in and really making sure that you take these blokes to ground or you take the arms is another thing, because that is a huge area of concern. Now, to get into the structural type of things, you guys and girls, I asked you to report back to me. We'll go into some analytics and look at some questions you want to hear. So let's take a look at that. So Connor Hackling asked the first question. Thank you very much for that. Is our backline good enough to play finals? So what I want to show you here is the back six makeup in really the last couple of games due to injuries and whatnot. So as you can see, the two major issues I see moving forward, well, probably three, are one, Whittaker. So we need to start to free Whittaker up. So what you've found, due to in-game and due to Young's inexperience, is Whittaker actually goes back to full-back, and Young has been playing a bit higher up the ground. And that's because the deep entries are killing Carlton. So what you find is when the ball is in this position here, Whittaker is tied up in a one-on-one. And what is happening from here is, if you look at the makeup of this back six, you ideally are lacking here someone to come in to intercept. Now, that is genuinely McGovern in an ideal world. And it's real heavily reliant here on ground ball gets and being really a front in these contested positions and getting it. The other second issue you've got here as well is look at the wingmen. So at the moment you've got O'Brien and Setterfield. Now, genuinely, if you look at their positions and you did it based on aggressive and offensive, O'Brien here on the left-hand side is a lot more aggressive than Setterfield. Now, what that does is pose a problem in your structure. Now, Doc and Newman and Plowman generally, Plowman rotates in these back pockets as and when. These two usually have a nice split where these two, Sard and Doc, are more 100%, nearly 100% game time. You're looking here for defence, so you can see here Doc and Plowman, real good one-on-one defenders. So is Newman. And it's covering this here, this left footer here in O'Brien, because defensively he's just not as sharp. Setterfield sits back a bit, and it's obvious you've got this man here, Sard, who's offering this overlap run. And when that overlap run comes, if he goes this way, you find Setterfield slots here. Or if he goes through the corridor where he really likes to go, you find this formation here. And that is really key. Now, what I want to show you here is how I think Carlton will look in an ideal world. So what we've done here is you're going to have the choice between O'Brien dropping out and Chera and Walsh take that wing position in a rotation, or Setterfield drops out, Chera and Walsh. Now, there's two huge dependents on this one. If Dow continues his form and breaks in, that could be another one, but that's a discussion for a later date. We're talking about the back line. So there's arguments for both, because I think this is a more balanced backline, and I'll tell you for why. So how I want to see Carlton play is, whether that's Young or Mcdonald, I'm not bothered about. And that'll be Whittaker. Whittaker, I think, does his best work at centre-half back, because you've got the interceptability here of McGovern. You've got great ball use here in the back line, and he's a big advocate, Vossi is, playing down this area here, the corridor. So McGovern, great kick. Doc, good kick. Sard, he's got the run. Stocker takes the corridor kick on. This will free up when the ball does come into this hot zone here, of Whittaker being able to peel back. Young or Mcdonald. I do like Mcdonald as the lockdown one-on-one key defender. I think he's a must when he comes back in. And it gives these options here, because Stocker is very adept on the ground, but he's also very good aerially against the bigger players. McGovern can swing in here. I think that is the back line that poses the most diversity in offence and defence. So great question, Connor. And I do think that's heavily reliant on who plays wings as well, because I think that is a mitigated disaster, that left-hand side. If O'Brien is there and if Setterfield is there on that right flank, that there, I think, isn't offensive enough. And I think that is a problem down the other end of the ground for us moving forward. Great question. Is it too early to worry about coaching, asked GA? And probably not, no, because we are 4 games into it. But we have got this really issue at the moment. So what I'm going to show you here is the average positions here versus Gold Coast Suns. Now, what is interesting about Gold Coast Suns, as we said in the review earlier, what it is known about is getting out of the contest. Getting out of the contest as quickly as possible gives you a chance against these sides. Now, what you found with Carlton is 2 things. One, Witts is very, very one-dimensional as a ruckman. He drops it down at the fall of the ball. Now, what you find here is, we're just going to use a few examples, but Tuck Miller, he starts at the back of the contest. So usually in a Carlton setup, as you can see here, the 3 rotations here because of the injuries is Hewitt starts off the back or Kennedy starts at the back of the contest. What Tuck Miller does really well is he actually starts in this, what is traditionally the defensive position of a stoppage or a contest, and he just beelines for the ball. We talked about this in the scouting report. And what this causes is Carlton reacted to this. And there's an old saying, as I said there, that you control what you can control, react to what you can't. Bad players react to what they can control. And this is what happened to Carlton. Now, what you find in these situations with Carlton is this was a huge issue. When the ball came out here, it was handballed way too much for my liking, and it should have been spread straight away. Now, Carlton need to create separation in this issue, and that is a big issue at the moment with Carlton's one-dimensional, storing from centre, storing from stoppages. They haven't worked out, and it's partly because of the personnel, which we've covered in the last question because of our defence. What you find here, now there's 2 trains of thought. O'Brien is the pet hate of Carlton fans. Everyone hates him. Setterfield's another one. But for me, what the big issue is here is a 2-factor answer here. That when Setterfield gets the ball, the big issue you've got here with Sets is he struggles and he handballs way too much for my liking in these points, in these areas of the ground. It really takes it up. Setterfield, he's a beaut. He looks to kick it, which is really, really important. In the wing position, he looks to launch it, and you want your wingers to be kicking it a lot more. The problem is when it comes down these flanks here, Setterfield looks to handball it, getting himself into a lot of trouble. It's not quick enough. The other issue we've got as well, and it's a really interesting one, is Curnow and McKay's work. McKay looks to run up here, so does Curnow, but the problem this week is they got way too far back. They were oscillating in this position. The problem is when they oscillate in this position, coming to help the defence back, there's nothing to kick to. And what you find with Carlton's entries from these positions is they're very shallow. They're in this position, keeping nothing in towards the back. How we got away with that in round 1 and round 2 was the forward pressure was immense. This week, 2 tackles inside 50, partly because the ball was in these positions here. Now, there's 2 options to fix this for me, and it's got to be addressed earlier. We've covered, I would be straight away getting rid of one of these guys, bringing in Stocker down there for the ball use down the back, and looking at these blokes here to be changed. One to be Chera and one to be Mr. O'Brien or Setterfield. What that does then is you've got to keep one player in the goal square. Carlton have this habit of these guys going walkabout. The second option is having TDK to come into the forward line, pitting it into the ruck, and then getting rid of Martin and having Curnow in this position. I think Curnow does his best work when he is acting as this conduit, and he needs to be here, and the winger needs to be getting the ball to him here and then allowing that kick in, because when Mackay is there, always, and in an ideal world this would be Durden, are already there at the fall of the ball, and they're working here at front of the ball. When that doesn't happen, why it's so one-dimensional at the moment is it's literally kicking to these 2 blokes here. And these guys are working overtime in defence. Always was really deep. So was Fogg. So was JSOS. And you're isolating them. You're creating that basketball thing of isolation. Really easy to defend. Really easy to pick off. Carlton start to react then to the players having the ball and running through this area. They're already in position. The corridor is shut off. And Carlton aren't allowing themselves to get out of that corridor cut-off, which you saw in the back half of the Doggies game. You saw it for the majority of the Hawks game. And you saw it for pretty much all the Gold Coast game. You cut off this area here, no Carlton. That can be alleviated by using the wide players and playing with a bit of speed. When Carlton go down the wings, they become static. And when you're static in this game, you're in for a world of hurt. Great question for Saras, who says, what is the plan to defend the corridor? Well, I think the first thing for Carlton, right, is how they can defend that. And this is going back to this game. When the ball falls down, I think in an ideal world, this is how Carlton's set up. So what you've got here is you've got Mackay, Owens, Durden, Martin, Curnow, JSOS. Chera or Walsh on that rotation. I'm going with O'Brien on this one, and I'll tell you for why. Hewitt, Pitt, Cripps, Walsh, Dow, Chera here. Mcdonald, Stocker. So I think that's probably the best. Now, there's how you set this up. One, you've got to utilise the handball change. So usually what you find from Carlton is Cripps goes to the ball here and it comes out here. Now, what we need here, because these guys start here, particularly from the centre clearance this is, We want a handball here and then a handball here and we're out. We want Curnow leading up to here, and it needs to be played quickly with handball. Why, when you handball it, is look at how they've moved in this thing. They've moved up in increments. They've moved up. They're there at the fall of the ball. The second way as well is a bit of diversity in what you do. At the moment, Carlton are really one-dimensional. At the moment, you know the ball needs to come here. Even with these kicks here, it comes to there. And that is so easy to defend. What Carlton need here is they need overlap run. They need overlap run. They need to get to this position here. And they need to be kicking into these hot zones here ahead of their small forwards and really looking to lock the ball in. At the moment, when Carlton are under pressure, and it is an alarming thing, but it is something that's alarming because it keeps happening, but it is easily fixed. The entries have to be deeper, but they have to come in from about 60. At the moment, O'Brien is booting it from about 70 metres, and that's not his fault. That's because at the moment, that's where the target is. When Curnow is running up here and Harry were really, and this is often you saw this, particularly against Hawthorn and really noticeable against Gold Coast, they are really dropping far too deep towards the ball. And it's about maintaining that discipline and keeping them in. What Gold Coast did really well is Casabene didn't leave the goal square. And that, for me, is the big thing. Handball, 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 and changing the personnel. I think here, and it's a big thing, I think Kennedy was found out this week. And I've said it for I'm a fan of Kennedy. I think he's a role player, though. And I think that he can get down right with Diesel and Voss are very hot on. And you play him in this position, it allows you to have a lot more dynamic. And it is worth remembering that Chera and Walsh have both ranked inside the top 10 of players played on the wing over 40% in the AFL. Gives you that rotation, and the top teams rotate one of them positions. And that is why. More diversity and more variety. A few of you asked this, and it was game plan related and how we can get the best out of Chera, which I think is very good questions. Now, what we saw last week, and we saw this against Hawthorn as well, is when you take this area out of Carlton, the corridor, there's a real issue. There's a real big issue of it. And I think what Carlton need to do here is really start to address this. And it is partly down to ball movement, but at the moment what you've seen here is how I would personally look to play. And I think it's a two-phased attack here of how to do it. I think that Kennedy is a great role player, but I think that what Carlton need to do to create another chain and another layer of evidence is to utilise outside run. You can't just keep being contested all the time. And I think that the way that we set up our backline is kind of dependent on how our wings are. So in the early part of this video, we talked about things that you change. I think this is really important here, that I think that if you add Dow into the mix or someone like that, with Chera, Walsh floating on one wing and O'Brien or Setterfield there, I think O'Brien wins it purely for his ability to kick more. And I think that that is really important. But what you found is Carlton, when they're under pressure, they handball and we go for this boot kick. And it is so one-dimensional at the moment that you know it's coming to Harry and Mackay. And we kind of rest on our laurels that these guys, when they have played, have got decent tackle numbers. What Carlton need to do is look for these more overlap runs. So I think that we need to, you see a lot of goals coming from bursts from stoppages and breaks, which Dow brings in. You saw this week that when players like Tuck Miller pressure it, Carlton really get panicked and react to it. I think this is a lot more counter-offensive. I think the other option as well is that when you're playing TDK, is that this guy here becomes TDK. And when you are under the cosh, Curnow goes out to the wing. These two are very strong marking down the wing. And I think that that is another option as well. That in these defensive situations, particularly when you are in trouble, that Chera and Walsh can peel off the ball. And you can look for this kick here. And then suddenly, this next kick here is a lot deeper in your setup. At the moment, what is happening is someone is running and kicking from here. And players are all over the place. We need to get the kick here to these two players ASAP and then create a chain. And when Carlton have been playing well, these players really come ahead of the ball. And that is when Carlton will add another layer. I think that's personnel related. It's also part of the structure related. But that is something that I think is really clearly seeing, because what is killing us at the moment is these shallow entries caused by having to enter from real deep. And that is partly personnel, and it's a lot coaching as well. This obviously is a really good question, and I'd say that, is it worried? Are we worried yet? No, not really. I mean, we are 4 games into the season. We're coming from a real big gap away from the top 8. Let's be honest. Last year, we showed how miles we are away. Voss hasn't had a huge amount of time to fix this, and what he has fixed, which is exponential, is the key areas, particularly around contested ball, particularly around our stoppages. Our inside 50 count as well is huge. Up until last round as well, against Gold Coast, we were ranked number 1 in possession and ranked number 1 in inside 50s against. And these were 2 areas that Carlton hemorrhaged. And when you come into something, it's hard to fix everything. So to use another example in my role in a development, what I do is I take someone and I label 3 things that need to be fixed. And then that gives them a fighting chance. At the moment, what you've seen from Carlton is they have a fighting chance. Now it's adding the other layers. The one concern for me, and this is a huge concern, I don't want to be too positive, is the Doggies showed vulnerability in the corridor. Hawthorn showed huge vulnerabilities, and Gold Coast, it was an aberration. And what Carlton have to do is work an outside game and work a plan B. At the moment, our plan A is fine, as displayed by 3 wins, 1 loss. The problem is our plan B, when it doesn't have scoreboard pressure, and that is the big difference between our 3 wins and our defeat. We didn't have scoreboard pressure, particularly in that third quarter. Carlton were ahead in most of the major key indicators, but then 5 behinds. And how hard is it to kick a goal when it's important? A lot of silly mistakes. Lockie O'Brien could have run on, got the extra 10 metres. Charlie didn't have to play on. All these factors come in when that scoreboard pressure is there. So for me, is it time to worry? No, it's not. It's time to really take your medicine and learn. There is a few massive cracks, though. Yes, there is. As Kylie says, Baggers and Jim Faz, great football minds, and they have a good opinion there. It's not time to worry yet, though, because it is fixable. And we've seen in them slides there is some quick fixes that Carlton can implement very quickly. But obviously, if this progresses by the bye, yes, panic stations need to be hit and we need to call the club into question. But for now, they're obvious, and we will see a response hopefully next week. But they are areas of concern and areas that I hope are addressed in training ASAP. 2 great questions here from Ewan and Peter, 2 friends of the channel. How important is this week win against preliminary finalists with their backs to the wall, no crips, and we other will deal, lose and more questions will come spot on. There always are. The nature of this beast, like Ewan says, 0-4, it's a big test for Port as well. Now, 2-fold answer to this question. I don't believe in no crips, no Carlton. Carlton have won before without crips, Fremantle a few years ago. And genuinely the structure comes, even with bad structure, they stepped up to the plate. For me, the major concern with Carlton is they still have them seeds of, it's amazing, isn't it, when we are favourites, how we implode. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think they were at the races yesterday. Now, I'd love to know, I agree with what Voss said in the press conference. We're not the finished article, and I think that's important to remember. We are coming from a long way back. We're like, we are miles away. We're like Bradbury in the Olympics away at the moment. So what Carlton need to do is they need elements of structure and elements of things. And this is a great test for them if Cripps is out. What I do like about the makeup is I think Bam Bam gets a chance. And we'll cover Bam Bam in a bit more detail. But I think Bam Bam gets a chance to really just play that central role with Hewitt without Cripps. So I kind of like that. I think that is Bam Bam's role. I think Bam Bam, for me, in an ideal world, if Dow ever reaches his ceiling, which at the moment we can only base it on what we know. Everyone gets a clean slate in 2022. Dow has performed in the VFL and done his job very, very well and looks back to his best. It gives us a bit more options there. It is a concern, though, because Port have been woeful, and with no Wines, no Dixon, 2 key cornerstones of their system is out of there. And Carlton should be looking to really create a focus, particularly in and around the ball, which hopefully we've seen with Walsh and Chera when they haven't played together, which is another concern, that they have really exploited the space created by Hewitt, by Kennedy. And that is a chance for Dow. I do think if they lose this game, though, the pressure builds. And the problem is at Carlton, the pressure is huge. You've only got to see how the fans have reacted after 1 loss. Granted, it was a very disappointing performance, but usually we have them disappointing performances and we're 0-4. There is elements of hope and there is elements of improvement. So for me, it's a really big game. And this could really tell, it's definitely going to tell me how concerned I should be if they back it up with another abject performance. Because for me, I'm counting 3 bad performances in a row if that becomes a bad performance. This question comes in from Big Benny Mcdonald. Thank you to you, mate. Great question. What's wrong with Kennedy? 7 touches leading to the last term. He seemed off all afternoon. Setfield was really struggling, but O'Brien seemed okay. I agree with that. I think that the big difference is if you look at actually the core differences between Setfield and O'Brien's game, before we get on the hate O'Brien train, is based on their game time played, Setfield had more, which accounts per minute played. O'Brien actually had more touches, but it was the handballs were a big issue for me. And when you're on the wing, if you handball too much, it means the ball isn't going in the direction you want. You want under pressure your wings to be gaining territory. And as shown by the stats, they didn't do it. But Kennedy was an interesting one for me. And you can see this here. This was a bizarre heat map for him with the time on the ground. He was a guy that really suffered from the Tuck Miller effect. We talked about Tuck Miller being real peculiar. He comes from a real big gap from the contest and he attacks it direct. He's very direct. Kennedy was a guy that, because he doesn't have the sheer raw pace, who reacted to that big style, and it really affected his game. And you actually saw him getting lost, and he started to go into the pocket of space that Hewitt did. Hewitt came into the ground to play where Cripper did and be at the fall of the ball, and chaos ensued. And I like Bam Bam for what he is, but I think you've got to understand what he is. He isn't a dynamic footballer. Kennedy is your archetypical, whether you like it or not, role player, and he's very good at that role player. And today he played a different role. And what you saw there, the touches were poor. He went at around 40% as well. He was a turnover merchant. Wasn't good enough for him. And you really saw there the erroneous parts of his game. Very solid footballer, and I don't want to be harsh on him, but he was a guy there that really needed to stand up in the Cripper mode. And I question why he couldn't do it when this is a job that he was built for. And it was a very poor game for him. Like a lot of players, he wasn't at the races, but he really wasn't at the races. He stayed at home and had his feet up when they were being loaded into the kennels. So this is a problem, though, with Kennedy. He doesn't want to be this deep, and he was deep. And some of these possessions as well weren't in stoppages and clearances. They were just general positions. A very poor game for him. And it did give me earmarks of Setfield being a defensive quarterback-type role, which isn't his role. Kind of got lost in the game and got caught ball watching a few times. So that is a concern and maybe a guy who may come out. A great question here from Whitney, lovely fan of the channel. Good day to you. Is it mental there's no killer instinct? I feel like too many players have been good their whole life and haven't needed to work for it. Also too nice. I want to see more fight and fight for each other. There's definitely a game here as well that I think that if we actually look at Carlton, and it was interesting, inside 50 count too, but if you actually listen to Voss, he said that the ability of Gold Coast, because our tackle numbers are abnormally high, one thing he said was their ability to break from chains and get the handball away in tackles. Now, I disagree strongly with Voss here using that as a stat, because Carlton's tackle efficiency was piss. And what you see is players don't wrap their hands. A really good example of this is Fisher. He never takes the arm, so there's always the handball out. And it's a two-pronged attack for Gold Coast, because Hawthorn did this. They take the contact. They take the contact, look to handball it off because their arms aren't grabbed. Cripper is a master at grabbing the arms. So is Hewitt. You see him, he grabs the arms. You saw it a few times with Witts, and the handball is ineffective. It bobs up because that's all they can do from that position. And I agree with you. There wasn't enough running with players as well. There wasn't enough of these handballs. Setfield was guilty of it often. Getting caught on the wing, having no bastard to handball to. So that loopy handball comes up straight in the air, becomes a contested situation. And there wasn't enough running with. There was another issue as well I had. Plowman did it a few times, ran the ball out of bounds. When you're getting battered in stoppages, the last thing you want to do is create a stoppage. So I agree with you. I do think they lack a killer instinct, and I do think they're too nice. And I think this week, because they didn't have the scoreboard pressure to be the bully, was a big issue. So I think that's a great point, and I think that's something that I do hope to see improve, which can only improve by personnel and positioning as well, I might add. Matt DT asking the questions that Pom has been literally shocked about. I've been saying this for 2 years since Cruiser went down, that Carlton's ruck stocks is piss poor, especially when we got rid of Phillips. I thought Phillips is a very able reserve ruckman. I don't like it. I haven't liked it for the last 2 years. I think it's a huge hole because I think PeterV, he's reliable and he's a very good ruckman. I love him, but I've never rated TDK as a ruckman. I don't think I will. I think he's definitely your ruck relief forward type player. And nothing I saw in juniors or seniors has changed my mind about it. JSOS, second best ruck, I think he's good. And I think what you've got to look at is why JSOS did look all right in the ruck against Wits at times over TDK is he doesn't contest the rucks. Bruce did this wonderfully for GWS. He becomes an extra body and he stops the ball getting out. The problem with TDK is he's so aggressive and he's trying to get them taps. If he doesn't win it, he's not there at the fall of the ball. And I think this is a huge issue for Carlton. I don't know why it hasn't been addressed. Murkoff is coming along leaps and bounds, which is good, but he's still miles away. He's still miles away from senior football. And the sooner he plays, the quicker you can destroy the hard work he's done. You've got to remember that he's coming against B-grade ruckmen a lot of the time, particularly against Hawthorn. He was playing a guy that was a key forward, that is now a key defender that happens to play in the ruck. So it's definitely a question for the list management team. I don't know why it hasn't addressed. Over 30 ruckmen are 10 a penny. Do you know what I mean? A 10 a penny and they cost chips. Do you know what I mean? It's a weird reason that Carlton don't have it because the history will tell us 30-year-old, 25-year-old baby is the key ingredient. And something that maybe Carlton might have to address in the mid-year trade and get the best state ruckman might have to be something that Carlton look as a stopgap. Big Cam with a big question. As we've covered earlier in the others, it may have answered it of how I'd structure up. But I agree. Particularly, the one thing that is underrated about Cripper's game is although he's a contested beast, he drags players in. And Voss touched on it with the ability to take the contact. The problem with Carlton as well is that we don't take contact well. Zach Williams is probably the biggest offender of it in the halfback. And this is, I think, a huge reason why our transition is shit. Is because he looks to handball it before the contact. Where you look at Weller and what he did down the back, he takes the contact and then handballs. Carlton genuinely tackle in twos as well, which creates overlaps. Look at Carlton's overlap goals as well. Gold Coast had 5 of them. And they are repeats of the Collingwood round 2 game, Port Adelaide, GWS in 2017. It's because Carlton just have the inability, A, to take the hands, creating the stopgap out the back. There's always numbers out the back. That's not structure. That's because no twat can take hands. I think at times our midfield is one-dimensional. And I think that Chera and Walsh are very similar players playing a very similar type of role. And I think that that's why Walsh and Chera have played better minus each other because they do get in each other's way. I would like to see Dow. What Dow brings and what he has shown in his VFL, and if you go back to his junior years, is he's very adept at kind of doing the Kennedy tackle work. He was a very good tackler as a kid, and he has shown it in VFL, but he can break lines. And I think Carlton lacks someone who breaks lines. Why we get away with it when Cripps is on the field is Cripps breaks lines as well, but that's through sheer brute strength. I do think that's an issue. I do think at the moment there is too many people doing the same job. And you saw that against Hawthorn, and you saw that under pressure where Hewitt and Cripps started to run into each other. Particularly against Gold Coast, Hewitt and Kennedy started to run into each other. There was a few bumps where they bumped each other. It definitely needs to be a little bit refined. It's a great question. I do think variety is the spice of life. And for a team that has had the least rotations in the midfield, it is something that I do think needs addressing down the track. This is the best question, isn't it? What, 6 quarters out of 16, isn't it? So far, so 10 lost, as Football Friends quite like says. Doesn't bother me really, because generally the core of the AFL flag winners is about 54 to 58%. So obviously it's 4 games, and a lot of these quarters we've lost. Carlton have had the opportunity as well to kick winning scores. They just didn't do it. You've got to look at it at base reality though. So if we're looking at it at base reality, you've also got to look at the 3 and 10. Scoreboard pressure is insane, and it always comes down to the quarters you've lost, how you've done it. But the quarters you win, how you do it. The simple thing is, at the moment, Carlton, when they have an off quarter, they have an off quarter. And it's simply the structure's worked out and there is no plan B. Now, the excuse for no plan B is obviously Carlton haven't had a plan A for 4 years either. So the fact we've got a plan A is a pretty miracle. It is something that I think by the bye, if it's still around that, we definitely have to worry. But at the moment, we have played two sides who have been phenomenal and one side that was in a rich vein of form. And I want you to go back to that Hawthorn game with St Kilda to just myriad everything else we've talked about. St Kilda are a heavy outside side and they absolutely battered Hawthorn. And I predict when they play Gold Coast, they'll absolutely batter them again as well. Very one-dimensional at times, as Cam said. So to answer your question, football friends, am I drinking the Kool-Aid? Not really, no. I'm confident that the boys can get it fixed. It is easily fixed and there is a lot more to go on now than there was 2 years ago. That things, when they go right, they go very right. The problem is at the moment is, like you say, it does need to be a bit more consistent. And I think that comes from the ability to manage games. At the moment, we don't manage games. We play on, particularly against Hawthorn. You saw it a lot. We played on a lot in that fourth quarter when the game was in our favour. Sometimes you've got to take the 30 seconds. And that is something that Voss is going to have to instill into these boys ASAP Rocky. I think this is a great call here from Tim W. And he asks a great question. PeterV is a huge out. He's one of the top ruckmen in the competition for hit-outs. He would have given it. And when you're giving up so many hit-outs, it's very easy. My issue from that game that we've just seen is Witts didn't do anything special. If you go back and watch the scout report, read the scout report I did for Blue Abroad, we talked at length at Tuck Miller and Jared Witts' influence. He just taps it down at his feet. I thought Carlton set up really for Tuck Miller. And you saw Hewitt and Kennedy both peel behind the ball to prepare for that marauding run that he does from that handball from Noah Anderson. Carlton have to be offensive in these stoppages and clearances, and that's why they've won so many. I don't think you can be defensive in today's game. And they really did panic to that. An old saying that my golf coach used to tell me when I was 15 was this: great players control what they control and react to what they can't. Bad players react to what they can control and use that as an excuse. And there it is. Carlton reacted to something they could quite easily control, and that was being heavy around the ball, albeit they lost Cripps, but even when Cripps was there, they weren't doing it. They were standing off. It is a huge issue around stoppages. And it feels like that Carlton really did try and change something almost to the media furore, which isn't there. And now it is there because Carlton lost and they didn't work that area of the ground. It's a great question. It was a real big issue the last 2 weeks as well when this corridor has been taken. Carlton have got to look at that because the stoppage clearances is what killed us. The clearances around the ground were good, but the stoppage clearance was horrible. And that was because we were really defensive. We were really behind the ball. No one was in front of the ball as well, so there was no options to go forward other than kick it long. That is something that Carlton will have to address, and it's about having brazen balls, really. I didn't count it, to be honest, because I saw it after my rewatch, but I have made a note here. Fisher, Martin, JSauce, O'Brien fucking picked the thing up. Carlton do seem to have a thing about territory at times, especially under pressure, and it is a common method in AFL to do it, but at the moment, it does seem weird. Get your head over the ball. Now, it seemed to be I felt like this was a reaction to when there was a stoppage. Carlton were getting battered in it, so they didn't want to create it. But then they negate that by just running out of bounds under zero pressure at times to create stoppages and looking for touchlines on the wing, which also I found truly bizarre at times. You've got to keep the ball in motion, but for me, I'm with you. Take the stoppage even if you are, because it got us into a trouble in the back half a lot of the time. So it's a great spot by Lachlan. Now we'll keep an eye on it for next week for you, mate. Thank you very much for your question, though, buddy. This question got asked a lot, as you can see. Lone Wolfan, Giroux, not Ben Curry, Tasmos, and Chris White asked this in a variety of ways. What would the changes be? To answer Tasmos' one direct, I actually like Stocker for Ploughman. I think it adds the depth. I think it adds the ability to use the ball. He's very strong on the ground, which I felt we were very weak on. And I find Ploughman, and I kind of called on it at the start of the year in one of the watch-alongs. Interesting how he suits this game style, because I don't think he does. He doesn't do enough with the ball in hand, and he looks to spend it very early. Stocker was sensational playing that role for the VFL, and I think he will towel Gray up. I'm very confident on that. PeterV is our most important player. I think he is very key cog especially how we work around stoppages, because he acts as the extra defender. Jesus is very adept at doing that as well in the stoppages. You watch him, he stands and he acts as the extra midfielder. And who would I drop out of the team? I think if Cripps goes down, Dow is in the team. So if that's the case, I would be dropping, obviously, Cripps omitted, Dow into the side. In an ideal world, obviously, I think Cripps, if Cripps can play, he can play. So if Cripps plays, my outs would be Setterfield, Fogarty and Plowman in, Pitternet, Dow and Stocker. If Cripps is out, I would leave Plowman in for this game. And my outs would be Setterfield, Fogg, Pitternet, Dow and Stocker in. If Cripps is out, obviously that would be Setterfield, Plowman, Cripps, Pitternet, Dow and Stocker in for me. I think both of them have shown it. I want to see a bit more from Philpy and I want to see a bit more from Kemp. At the moment he's playing forward, but they would be my ins and outs dependent on injury. Well, that's it then, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for watching. Much love to everyone. I really enjoyed answering them questions and whatnot. Thank you very much for that. And until next time, I'll see you on Wednesday for the VFL report with a special guest. Palm out.